Hello and welcome to the Women in Motorsport program. I'm Isha Azim, and with me we have Ben Schneider and Emily Sharp. As always, a big thank you to our Patreon investors Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Your investment in the Grid Network, no matter the size, plays a crucial role in our mission to promote women in motorsport. You too can make a difference by clicking on the link in the video description. Or you can always opt to do a one-time investment through Buy Me a Coffee or YouTube Super Chats. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share all of our content with your family and friends who love motorsports. Now, Ben, let's get this show on the road by starting off with a recap of the F1 Academy.
Thank you, Isha. Well, mathematically speaking, we still have 9 drivers technically eligible for the championship, but I think in reality, it may be becoming very clear who's going to be lifting that championship trophy at the end of the year. Abbi Pulling won race 1 and took third in the second race, continuing an all-podium finishing streak, and remarkably, that third-place result in race 2 is her worst finish of the season so far. At the pace that she's on, she could reduce that mathematical number of drivers left in the championship fight to as low as 2. Doriane Pin may be still the only one still with any sort of prayer at taking this championship fight to Abbi Pulling. We'll talk about her in just a minute. But first, Emily, we'll start with you here. When I say there's 9 drivers mathematically eligible, that includes drivers like Jess Edgar, Aurelia Nobles, who are on 22 points to Pulling's 190. They would have to take pole position, set the fastest lap, and win every race from here on out, assuming Abbi Pulling doesn't score a single point. So realistically speaking, can we crown Abbi Pulling champion-elect here? Does she seem to have one hand on this trophy already at this point in the season?
Well, I'm already going to use a word that you used, Ben. It's truly remarkable that third place is her lowest finish of the season so far. And again, she was just so dominant in race 1. I mean, obviously, Doriane had a unfortunate time penalty for her false start, which, again, a little questionable when you rewatch it, but we're going to go with the race directors and what they saw. But at the end of the day, Abbi had a 6-second lead over Nerea Marti. And again, race 2, she put on a gallant effort to try to overtake Maya Woog. But of course, she had that home race advantage. So we all know that you get the extra boost of speed when you're racing at home. But again, to go back to your question, Ben, we've been talking about it for weeks. Abbi has had one hand on the trophy for weeks. And I'm going to say it with my full chest. This is Abbi Pulling's championship to lose at this point. Of course, next race we're going to see the ladies is out in Singapore. And I guess there is an advantage for the other competitors because the women haven't raced there before. So perhaps that's going to level out the field. But Abbi is just running away with this championship. And she's been so dominant so far. I can't imagine she's going to have a disastrous end of her season.
Yeah, I completely agree with you here, Emily. I think that it's very obvious that Abbi Pulling is going to take home the championship at the end of this 2024 season. As Ben pointed out, her worst place finish this season was third place. It's still a podium finish. So what does that tell you about Abbi Pulling? It's insane. And I think she's had a great season. She's a talented driver. And then, something else that Ben pointed out is that by the next race, she could bring down that number of the drivers who are eligible in the championship to 2. And I think that after it's just going to come down to 1 at one point, and then it's just going to be going to Abbi. So I don't have much more to add. I just really think that there's no other driver you can look at this point.
Yeah, probably a matter of when, not if, that championship is officially clinched here. But I think Abbi Pulling is performing how we expected Doriane Pin perhaps to perform. She was, I think, the one that, especially after the first weekend in Saudi Arabia, where she crossed the finish line first in both races. Of course, she had that, what I still think was incredibly too harsh of a time penalty for taking an extra lap in race 2. And an injury's also set her back here. But she's second in points, 71 back of Abbi Pulling right now. Like I mentioned, she had that injury that she was recovering from in Spain now here at the Dutch Grand Prix weekend. Ended up taking the win in race 2, her first podium since Miami. Does that give her any sort of spark here? Can she take the championship fight to Abbi Pulling still, or is Abbi too far out in front? Mathematically, she would need to outscore her by 11 points per race. That would, even if she wins out here, require some help from Abbi Pulling not performing how she's been performing all year.
I don't see it happening. Ben, as you pointed out earlier this season, we were all looking at Doriane Pin. We were talking about her. But I think that at this point right now, Abbi's the one to watch out for. She's just going to take the championship home. And as you mentioned, Doriane Pin, needs 11 points, not just 11 points by the end of the season, but she needs to outscore Abbi Pulling by 11 points every race. And I don't see that happening. It's just not realistic. And I think that, there's not much more for us to talk about. It's just going to Abbi this season.
Yeah, and I'm going to do another callback, Ben. I've been really focused on Doriane's unfortunate injury, but I think to your point, I think the momentum began going towards Abbi with the time penalty that Doriane was distributed back in the first weekend of the season. And that phrase of like, when you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, the rest of your day just doesn't fall into place. I feel like that potentially was what Doriane has been trying to get caught up from since the beginning of the season. And again, to your point, it's not just by the end of the season, she needs to finish 11 points ahead. She needs to do that every single race. And I don't feel like it's feasible. Abbi is just too dominant. She seems like she is just totally locked in. Again, more races to come. We have 3 more stops ahead. Again, 2 races per stop. So there are opportunities for Doriane to lessen the gap. But I don't see Abbi having a completely disastrous end to her season to give enough help to Doriane to make up the championship.
Well, let's look a little bit further down the championship order here. We've got the young American Chloe Chambers in third. Nerea Marti is in fourth, and she is one of the 5 drivers that is not officially fully supported by one of the 10 F1 teams. She's ahead of Maya Vogt from Ferrari, the 3 Red Bull affiliated drivers, and Bianca Bustamante with McLaren, who's in 7th right now in the championship. So, Emily, if she returns to F1 Academy next year, would teams from Formula One start looking at Nerea Marti as a driver to pick up to fully back for the 2025 season?
She's absolutely performed very consistently. And again, to your point, she is doing what she needs to do, somewhat like Abbi Pulling. She hasn't had too disastrous of a finish this season. Overall, I believe 4th place. She's running currently in the championship. So she is putting her place as someone that should be considered and looked at as a consistent performer. The problem is that there are extremely limited opportunities in this field and extremely talented drivers, as we see in, F1, F2, F3. So she certainly is someone that's aligning herself to be considered, but is there a spot for her? Is there an opportunity for her next year? That's what we're going to have to watch and find out.
Yes, I think Emily brings up a great point. Looking at the championship, Nerea Marti is in 4th place. She's ahead of all 3 Red Bull drivers, the McLaren and the driver for Ferrari. So I think that's a very good place to position yourself. But then, as Emily pointed out, there is the risk of, are the other teams going to be switching for drivers next season? Is there going to be a spot opening up for her? So I think that, if it were just looking at her performances and where she is in the championship right now, in comparison with the other drivers behind her, I think that she could very easily have a spot next season. But it does raise some other concerns about, where the other drivers would go, where what teams would support what drivers. And I just think that it's something we're just going to have to look out for. You can't predict it at this point.
All right, we'll leave it there. One clarification regarding the Red Bull drivers. I said the 3 affiliated drivers, of course, Emily DeHaas, part of the Red Bull Academy, but it's the Alkabaisi sisters, Hamda with Red Bull Racing and Amna with the RB team, respectively, that have the full backing. So just to clarify what we meant by that here. But we'll keep an eye on the standings and how everything continues to sort itself out here over these final few rounds. And, of course, more coverage of the F1 Academy right here on this show on the Grid Network. But in the meantime, Isha, let's switch over to INDYCAR and Indy NXT, also coming to a close, nearly wrapping up their season here in 2024.
Yes, that's right, Ben. Milwaukee hosted the second to last round of the INDYCAR and Indy NXT season. Let's start with Indy NXT and Jamie Chadwick, who came home in 5th place after she started in 3rd place. Now, she is 6th in the Indy NXT championship standings and could climb as high as 4th by the end of the season. Nashville is a 1.33-mile oval with 14 degrees of banking in the corners. So, Ben, Emily, this will be the biggest oval that Jamie Chadwick takes, but with the wide track surface, do you guys think that there is room for improvement?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I can't recall Jamie Chadwick ever doing anything like this before. She's done a few ovals in Indy NXT, but never one to this scale. We don't do the Freedom 100 anymore. And, obviously Texas has even fallen off of the IndyCar series schedule. So even for the top IndyCar drivers, this is only going to be the second race of the year of a championship finale. Imagine that, where we're using that aero kit this season. So the Indy NXT drivers, they really haven't. I mean, Jamie Chadwick's not going to be the only one in this field that this is something brand new that they're going to have to try to adapt to here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this race plays out. But I think that this is going to be very telling for potentially what Chadwick should do next season. If she goes out and performs, flirting with the top 5 in the 4th or 6th place, like you mentioned, Isha, about where she's been on pace all year, then I think, maybe those conversations might be warranted to maybe move her up a year earlier than we're expecting. But what I anticipate is going to happen is this is going to be probably a weekend like she had the Gateways and Iowas of the world last year, just because this is something so radically different, even from what we just saw in Milwaukee this past weekend. I think it's going to take her some time, realistically speaking, to adapt to it. And I still believe, I mean, she could go out and win this finale here at Nashville. I still think for her career long-term, it would probably be best if she does one more year of Indy NXT. But then again, sponsorship and opportunity and, seats or opportunities like that open up for her. Sometimes you have to take those. So we'll see what her plans for next year hold. But I think this weekend is going to be very telling and very interesting for what she might do next season.
I think this weekend is going to be very interesting in general. I mean, to your point, this is something radically different for her as an individual, but the series as a whole. The last time we were in Nashville at the Superspeedway was in 2008 with an INDYCAR car. So it's going to be wild for all of these drivers going out there and experiencing something to this scale, to the size of this oval. And then for her specifically, she is still gaining her strength as an ovals driver. So I agree with everything that you said, Ben. I don't really have too much more to add, but to her benefit, she is going to have a lot of space. Historically, those Indy cars have all kind of lined up and ran single file in the racing line. So it'll be interesting to see where she starts, if qualifying is going to be that make or break moment for her. And again, anything's possible, truly. Maybe she's going to truly blow us all away and win the whole thing. But I think, again, very much like Nerea Marti, she's had a very strong, consistent season. She's potentially going to finish in the top 5, top 4 overall for the championship. So excellent outing for Jamie Chadwick. And like Ben, we're all very excited to see what next year holds for her.
Yes, definitely. Now, looking at Nashville racing, do you anticipate that there will be pack racing, or do you think the field will be more spread out?
Yeah, again, it's hard to predict because these cars are very different than when they would have ran back in the early 2000s. But historically, if we go back and we watch those videos, Scott Dixon, one of the drivers that would have been there in 2008, they were racing single file. So I think that they will. Again, restarts are a whole different beast, but for the most part, I think they're going to be pretty well spread out. It's a pretty big track, and I do feel like qualifying is going to make or break where she lines up on Sunday. But again, anything's possible, and it's always fun to watch when you go to a super speedway.
Yeah, I have no idea because, if you think about it from the IndyCar perspective, we're going here with a hybrid system now. That's going to change things. And, with how few of these larger oval tracks we run on nowadays, I think who knows what's going to happen here. If it turns out to be a pack race, I hope it doesn't, because I feel like those can, from a safety perspective, be a little terrifying, particularly. I definitely don't want to see it in Indy next year, not just because of the safety, but certainly because I think pack racing can just be a lottery at times, and you don't want to see that have any sort of impact on. I mean, obviously Louis Foster's already wrapped up the Indy NXT championship, and Alex Palou probably has one hand on the IndyCar championship, but there's still prize bonuses for different spots in the standings here. You don't want to see somebody get taken out in the next and not of their own doing. Of course, that can happen at any time you're on a high speed oval like this, but I certainly hope we see the field spread out a little bit more, and I'm cautiously optimistic we will. But I have zero background in engineering or science or physics or anything of that sort. I couldn't tell you one way or another what we're going to see here. So speaking as a neutral fan here, I'm excited to see another oval here. We've been begging for things like this, and to have the championship weekend on an oval for the first time in, I think, really a decade. I think you have to go back to Fontana, which no longer exists in its current form. The last time we crowned our champions on an oval in the IndyCar series. So it's going to be an exciting weekend.
Yes, certainly it's going to be an exciting weekend. Now, looking over at another driver in IndyCar, Catherine Legg was in the Milwaukee Mile for both races. She was 19th in race 1 and 15th in race 2, and she led 2 laps during the second race at Milwaukee. Now, considering how Indianapolis and Gateway ended with her day done early in both races, Milwaukee saw her finish both races as well as lead 2 laps. So, Ben, starting with you, considering these prior races, was the Milwaukee Mile a success for her?
Yeah, I think success is a relative term. When you're in a situation like Catherine Legg is in, obviously she's not a full-time driver this year. This deal was put together fairly late in the season, and it's been a long time since we've seen her in the IndyCar series this regularly. So I think that when you consider that, and you also consider the team she's driving for in Dale Coyne Racing, it's not like she's in a Penske or Ganassi entry here. I think you can look at a top 15 in a race that had a ton of attrition and a ton of crazy wild things going on. Just bringing the car home in itself is a moral victory in many respects. That being said, I'm sure everybody at Dale Coyne, and let's give Dale Coyne Racing some credit where it's due here. They have won races on occasion. They have been known to flex their muscles occasionally and be able to put in some strong runs and quality drives with different drivers at different points in their history. So I'm sure, Catherine Legg's competitive fire burns just as much as everybody else's in the series here. I'm sure she's not thrilled or satisfied with the top 15, but I think all things considered, when you look at it in the grander scheme of things, in the context of how her season has gone so far, I think you can walk away from this weekend feeling pretty satisfied. Even getting up there and leading a couple of laps, I think it was off sequence, with her pace and everything. But, just to be able to come away from the weekend saying that and get a top 15 out of it, bringing the car home in one piece, job well done.
Yeah, and to your point, Ben, 15th, 19th, taken out of context, probably not walking away going like, oh, what a great weekend. But for her, given that her car finished both at the races and in the points, and given the issues that her car has had earlier in the season, she wasn't taken out by mechanical issues like her competitors were in these races. She wasn't taken out in a collision, so she brought the car home both races. Granted, to your point, she was 4 laps under on her better performing day. So again, a little to your point, like probably not feeling extremely satisfied with the pace, but she brought it home. And again, I think this is a good indication, because she was able to finish all of the laps, of what that Dale Coyne number 51 is capable of. So we're still looking ahead to see what, next year is going to look for her, let alone next outing at Nashville. But happy for her that she was able to get more drives in this season, and happy for her that she was at least able to finish both races and bring home some points for the team.
All right, now Nashville has yet to be announced. We will be waiting to see once the entry list or announcement is made. And with that, Emily, let's switch to the ARCA Menards series and talk about how their race weekend went.
Yes, thank you, Isha. The Southern Illinois 150 at DuQuoin State Fairground was this past weekend. Ben, unfortunately, this race took place at the same time as the Southern 500 on Sunday. Tony Breidinger and Amber Balkan were both in the field. Neither finished on the lead lap, but Tony did get 9th and Amber ended in 11th. Tony is 5th in the standings and Amber is behind her by 27 points. Ben, how big is the top 5 in the ARCA standings come season end, down to 4 remaining races?
Yeah, top 5 is certainly a modest success, I would say. I think, when you consider the fact that Tony and Amber in particular are driving Venturini cars, I'm sure they would like to be a little bit higher than that in the standings. Their other full-time teammate, Chris, right now is 3rd. But it's been a very interesting dynamic in ARCA this season, because we're 16 races of 20 in here, 80% of the season done, and we still are looking at a situation where not a single full-time driver who's run every race has visited victory lane yet this season. The Rev Racing drivers, Andres Perez and LeVar Scott, have come the closest, but that certainly throws a wrench in the championship when you have these part-timers like William Sawalich or Connor Zolich, who have been the 2 most dominant, winning all these races here. And then you factor in the combination races with the ARCA Menards Series East, which we'll talk about a little bit in just a moment here. The championship, looks a little bit different than it does, say, if you're following one of the top 3 touring divisions in NASCAR. And obviously there's no playoff system either here. It's a straight up battle all throughout the season, which in my humble opinion is how it should be in stock car racing, but we'll save that for another episode, as we always do. But I think when you look at these last 4 races here, again, we'll get into them all individually here in just a minute, but I think there's certainly an opportunity for Tony Breidinger and Amber Balkan to climb a little bit higher standings here. I think the Rev teammates are probably going to finish 1-2, Andres Perez and LeVar Scott, and they would be my 2 that I would pick here to visit victory lane most likely. But when you look at their pace compared to Chris Wright's this season and Christian Rose of AM Racing, who's ahead of them in 4th right now, if they put in some quality drives, if they stay out of trouble and can bring the cars home, in and around the top 5, I think, there's certainly an opportunity for them to finish there in the final point standings. I think that would be, again, a solid result, but something that you would want to build on if and when they return to the series next season, or certainly, in Tony Breidinger's case, I know we've had those Truck Series rumors floating around for a while as well. So we'll see what the future holds for them. But I think as of right now, just climbing a couple more spots in the point standings would be a good goal for each of them.
Yep, and looking ahead to the future, as you said, we have 4 very different tracks remaining, with Watkins Glen being a road course. Bristol Motor Speedway is a high bank short track. Kansas Speedway, a 1.5 mile oval, and Toledo Speedway is a short track hosting the finale. So out of the last 4, which ones appear to be the most challenging to you?
I think it's Bristol by a mile. And I say that just because of the high banks and the high speed. And, to be honest with you, Emily, there are a lot of people out there that I think ARCA probably shouldn't be at Bristol. And, I don't say that because I don't think, there's enough talented drivers in the field to handle that racetrack. I just think when you look at the inexperience of a lot of those drivers, and then you couple that with the speed discrepancies that we see, again, no disrespect, but like the Brad Smiths and Club Racings of the world, who are out there on shoestring budgets, both of them, as I wrote in my article for Brock Beard and LastCar.info this week, basically straight up admitted that their runs were starting parts because they couldn't risk tearing their equipment up, on the dirt track without having a backup car. That's the situation that they're in. And, you put them on a tight half-mile track with what I think is probably going to be upwards of 30 cars. This is a combination race of the ARCA Menards Series East. So all those full-timers are going to be out there as well. It's a very high car count at this race every year. And with such discrepancy in those speeds between the front runners and the back markers, it does create some scary situations, even some dangerous situations when those cars are getting lapped around the half mile at Bristol. So, from that perspective, it's certainly challenging to navigate. And I think, you got a lot of drivers that are just going to be hoping, like Connor Zilic, the points leader right now, the only way he can really lose this championship in the fight with William Sawalich is if he gets taken out in something most likely not of his own doing here. So he just has to make sure that he keeps the car clean and finishes the race. I think that's going to be the goal for a lot of these drivers, probably including Tony Breidinger and Amber Balkin. They've had some rough races in this last half dozen or so in that stretch since we started the summer. They certainly don't want to have another DNF, and that's going to jeopardize their chances of finishing in the top 5 or maybe even higher in the standings like we just talked about. So I look at Bristol as a massive challenge. Obviously, Watkins Glen is a completely different type of track with a high-speed road course. That presents its own challenges here. As do Kansas and Toledo, to be fair. Toledo certainly has been known to create some wild moments hosting championship finales for ARCA in the past. So we'll see how that goes. But in terms of looking at the entire field as a whole, I think it's Bristol by a mile. I think just with everything that goes into that race, being a companion race with the Cup Series, there's going to be a lot of eyes on the field that day. And again, a high car counted track that fast, it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Well, it's very challenging, to your point, at times extremely dangerous, but always worth watching. So we will absolutely be watching. We'll absolutely be looking ahead to see how this series unfolds in that next 4 stops. And Isha, we'd like to bring it back over to you of what we could look ahead for on this show.
That's right, Emily. Let's talk about this upcoming weekend. Now, we will not be having any female racers competing in major events internationally. However, there will still be some racing going on with the World Rallycross underway, as well as MotoGP and NASCAR, which will both be racing this weekend. Now, that's all for today's show. A friendly reminder to subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon. Don't miss any of our programs, and next week, don't miss any of our coverage for the NTT IndyCar Series season finale. Now, the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix will be at Nashville Superspeedway. Alex Palou and Will Power are both going for their 3rd IndyCar championship, so be sure to catch our coverage all week. For Emily and Ben, I'm Isha. Thank you for watching and enjoy the races.